Did you know African leaders are now refusing to be the puppet of the West? What is the West doing about this? The West views African leaders who refuse to be their puppet as enemies and uses a variety of strategies to overthrow them. One way to do this is to incite coups against them, as is the case of Ibrahim Traoré at this moment. 9 coup attempts have already been made against Ibrahim Traoré, all by outside forces. Traoré has a lot of popularity in the region, but the West is hostile. Maybe this is the result of his unwavering refusal to follow their control plan. But how has Traoré defended himself against these attempted coups? Let's investigate. There is a trend that keeps coming up in African politics. An African leader is immediately branded as a threat or an adversary if they choose to break up relations with Western nations or adopt policies that go against Western interests. This is a strategy used to weaken and destabilize leaders who have the audacity to put their country's sovereignty ahead of the demands of foreign powers. Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, is a prime example of this phenomenon. Traoré has experienced more coup attempts than any other African leader in history. Traoré's leadership has served as a symbol of neo-colonialist resistance. He has become a target because of his dedication to adopting policies that serve his people, rather than placating Western powers. Several attempts have been made to remove him by manipulating internal destabilizing forces. But their attempts have always been unsuccessful. Every missed opportunity seems to strengthen his resolve, and the Burkinabe people's support for him. The latest incident at Burkina Faso's presidential palace serves as a reminder of the ongoing dangers Traoré faces. An unknown person suddenly and violently attacked the guard station with the intent of breaking through the president's security. President Traoré's removal was clearly the goal, but security personnel were able to maintain control and stop additional violence thanks to the prompt intervention of the on-duty military. This is just one of the numerous failed coup attempts against Traoré. What then is the narrative of Traoré? Known for his unwavering resistance to Western domination, Ibrahim Traoré has proven to be a formidable leader. His administration has been distinguished by a string of audacious choices meant to reaffirm Burkina Faso's independence. He has stayed independent and resisted outside pressure to follow Western goals. Traoré distinguishes himself as a leader committed to his country's genuine interests by emphasizing economic empowerment, political autonomy, and national self-reliance in his initiatives. The recent attempt on his life serves as a sobering reminder of the risks he must overcome. This attempt on his life highlights the extent to which his enemies will go in order to undermine his government. Traoré's presidency has been plagued by persistent threats even though he has the unwavering support of his people. The Burkinabe army's internal differences and the impact of external forces attempting to undermine his leadership are highlighted by the fact that the majority of these threats originate from within the army. These enemies within his own country, who are frequently swayed by other influences, have never stopped trying to topple his administration. This unwavering resistance is indicative of a larger external manipulation campaign meant to upend the governments of countries who defy Western authority. Traoré's story vividly illustrates the continuous battle on the continent for true independence and self-determination, and highlights the difficulties experienced by African leaders who dare to put their country's sovereignty above foreign interests. Who might these outside powers attempting to harm Traoré be? For more videos about Captain Ibrahim Traoré and the total liberation of Africa, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now let's continue. To find out which of the countries Burkina Faso collaborates with may have been implicated in the coup attempt, let's discuss all of them. Recent coup attempts in Burkina Faso have been heavily influenced by the West and outside parties, especially in light of the country's continuous security crisis and military instability. Gaining an understanding of the impact of these outside factors is essential to understanding the larger geopolitical dynamics at work. France has played a significant role in the area, especially in Burkina Faso, where it has been conducting Operation Barkhane and keeping a military presence since 2013. A pillar of France's foreign policy in Africa has been this mission, which targeted armed groups in the Sahel. France's efforts to reduce the growing threat of terrorism have been severely condemned, despite the country's good intentions. There is a general disenchantment with French participation as a result of the insurgency's persistence and, in many cases, intensification. Local discontent with French intervention has been exacerbated by this perceived inefficiency. The anti-French feeling was evident when demonstrators assaulted the French embassy and French institute in Ouagadougou while brandishing Russian flags. This episode was a part of a larger pattern of rising unhappiness among the Burkinabe people, not an isolated one. The protesters said that while France ignored the security concerns of Burkina Faso citizens, it was abusing the country's resources. Due to Burkina Faso's cozy relations with Russia, many residents believe that France may have been involved in the coup attempts. They see the European power as an unwelcome and destabilizing influence. A legacy of mistrust is also exacerbated by France's past colonial ties to the area and its continued influence in the political and economic realms of its former colonies. Many Burkinabe residents see France's efforts as a continuation of neo-colonial tactics, in which the former colonizer keeps unduly influencing the country's sovereign affairs. This viewpoint has been made worse by France's participation in the resource extraction industries of the area, which many residents feel disproportionately serves French interests at the expense of the local populace's poverty and instability. However, we must not overlook Russia. Is there a threat it poses? Russia's involvement in Burkina Faso, especially through the Wagner Group, a private military corporation, signifies a dramatic change in the geopolitical dynamics of West Africa. Wagner mercenaries have been observed, despite the lack of conclusive evidence linking Russia to the coup attempts. These mercenaries are well known for their participation in a number of conflicts in Africa, frequently lending support to governments that coincide with Russian strategic objectives. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the new commander of the junta, has welcomed the group's presence in Burkina Faso, seeing Russian support as a counterbalance to Western dominance. Russia's engagement is thought to have the ability to tip the scales in the area, moving the power balance away from established Western allies. Traoré's strategic shift toward an ally he thinks will uphold Burkina Faso's sovereignty above that of the conventional Western powers is demonstrated by his decision to reinforce his connections with Russia. Based on reciprocal benefits, Burkina Faso seeks a partner that will back it in its battle against insurgency, without imposing conditions similar to those associated with receiving aid from the West, while Russia looks to increase its influence in Africa through military and economic cooperation. The operations of the Wagner Group in the Central African Republic and other African countries point to a pattern of Russian assistance for regimes that oppose Western hegemony. These regimes frequently give Russia access to important natural resources and military installations in return for military support. Russian mercenaries are perceived in Burkina Faso as a stabilizing force that may aid the nation in addressing its security issues more skillfully than the French military. It seems improbable that Russia would try to overthrow Traoré since it is in line with their larger geopolitical objectives to back a leader who is prepared to oppose Western hegemony. What about the United States? Compared to France, the United States has historically had less sway over the Sahel. On the other hand, its engagement in Burkina Faso, mostly in the form of counterterrorism and humanitarian assistance, reflects its strategic objectives in the area. In addition to offering humanitarian aid, the US has criticized military takeovers and pushed for stability and democratic rule of law. Despite these initiatives, France's long-standing presence continues to eclipse US influence. On the other hand, the US has a stake in limiting Russian influence everywhere, even in Africa. There's little doubt that Washington is concerned about Burkina Faso's strengthening relations with Russia. The US sees Russia's growing sway over Africa as a component of a larger geopolitical struggle akin to rivalries from the Cold War. This viewpoint guides US policies to thwart Russian actions, even in areas where it has little direct influence. It's possible that the US and France will view Traoré's government as a danger to their strategic interests in the area, which could prompt actions to depose him. Reducing Russian influence is an aim that the US and France have in common, and this goal may spur joint action against Traoré's government. According to reports, the US is upping its diplomatic and intelligence efforts in the area, with a particular emphasis on opposing Russian influence and bolstering allies that share Western values. The US has also participated in initiatives to strengthen local security forces' capacity in order to improve their ability to fight terrorism and uphold stability. These initiatives, however, frequently have requirements that match local policies with US strategic goals, which irritates leaders who value national sovereignty, such as Traoré. The United States' prioritization of democratic government and human rights conflicts with the practical strategy of endorsing leaders that oppose Western hegemony, further complicating US involvement in places such as Burkina Faso. What, though, is the West seeking? Western nations like France and the United States have always had a keen interest in the abundant and varied resources found in Africa. In contrast to China, which focuses mostly on trade agreements, Western countries frequently exercise influence and control over African governments in order to gain access to these important resources. The connections between African countries and Western powers are shaped by a complicated dynamic where geopolitical strategies and economic goals interact. This historical pattern demonstrates this dynamic. An African administration that aligns its policies with Western interests often ends up with accords that give the West first dibs on the natural resources of the continent. These agreements are frequently criticized for providing little recompense to the host countries, while disproportionately benefiting Western governments and corporations. Despite the rhetoric of partnership and development often emphasized in high-profile summits between African and Western leaders, this exploitation has shown the underlying aim of Western governments in their contacts with African countries. Leaders such as Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré have pursued alternative ties, especially with China and Russia, in opposition to Western interests. By putting national sovereignty and mutual gain first, these alliances subvert the Western world's long-standing hegemony in African politics. Traoré's position is consistent with an increasing belief held by African leaders that they should broaden their international contacts beyond their historical connections to past colonial countries. But Traoré's allegiance to China and Russia, as opposed to the West, has positioned him such that Western powers see him as an enemy. In addition to straining relations, the preference for non-Western relationships may have increased mistrust and resistance from Western governments. Western contempt for Traoré's decisions may show up as clandestine moves to weaken his authority, like arming military interventions to topple his administration or arming internal groups. Traoré's political environment is made more complex by the strategic rivalry between Western nations and new international powers like China and Russia for influence in Africa. Although they provide different paths for political and economic collaboration, China and Russia also pose threats to Western hegemony and influence in the area. The complexity of African sovereignty and the decisions its leaders must make in navigating international relations that strike a balance between political stability, economic progress, and national autonomy are highlighted by this geopolitical contest. There are more reasons to despise Traoré than his ties to China and Russia. What more did Traoré do to earn the hatred of the West? Burkina Faso's leadership under Ibrahim Traoré has aggressively pushed policies meant to lessen French influence, which is a major break with the nation's historical links as a former French colony. Traoré has openly denounced what he sees as economic exploitation and neocolonial practices by former colonial powers, especially France. Calls for greater autonomy and sovereignty in Burkina Faso's international relations, questioning the persistent presence of Western countries in African issues, have been a defining feature of his anti-France discourse. Practically speaking, Traoré's administration has made strides to lessen French influence and presence in Burkina Faso. This entails the withdrawal of bilateral military cooperation agreements as well as the expulsion of French military troops. Removing French Special Operations Forces from Burkina Faso was a significant diplomatic move that demonstrated Traoré's determination to maintain Burkina Faso's sovereignty over its military and security policies. The worsening of ties between Burkina Faso and France as a result of Traoré's policies is indicative of larger conflicts between former colonial powers aiming to retain their influence through diplomatic, military, and economic methods, and African countries desiring more autonomy. Because of his opposition to French domination, Traoré has gained both domestic and international support and notoriety as a symbol of African resistance to Western control. Ibrahim Traoré's policies and actions are seen by Western countries, like as France and the US, as direct threats to their historical clout and strategic interests in Burkina Faso and the larger Sahel area. Western objectives seeking to retain economic, military, and political sway over African nations are seen to be hampered by Traoré's refusal to take part in summits sponsored by the West and his attempts to scale back the deployment of foreign forces in the continent. Burkina Faso's strategic importance, especially given its resources and Sahelian location, highlights the geopolitical implications in how the West responds to Traoré's leadership. A wider geopolitical struggle for influence and control over African nations amid altering global dynamics has reportedly seen Western governments participate in clandestine operations and back internal factions opposed to Traoré's government. There are similarities between this and Thomas Sankara. The circumstances surrounding Thomas Sankara in the 1980s and Ibrahim Traoré's current predicament have striking similarities, underscoring recurrent themes of defiance against foreign forces and the fight for African sovereignty. Thomas Sankara became a transformative leader in Burkina Faso, which was then called Upper Volta, in the 1980s. By driving colonial powers, especially France, out of his nation and enacting extensive reforms meant to provide his people dignity and self-sufficiency, he bravely challenged colonial forces. Sankara's presidency was distinguished by his unwavering rejection of neocolonialism and his dedication to eliminating inequity and corruption. For their time, Sankara's policies were revolutionary. He renamed the nation Burkina Faso, which translates to Land of the Upright People, and he also carried out gender equality initiatives, mass immunization campaigns, and agricultural reforms. His administration made a concerted effort to support grassroots organizing and independence in order to wean the country off of Western exploitation and dependence. Sankara's nationalist policies and unwavering opposition to Western economic interests, however, directly threatened those who benefited from Burkina Faso's riches. His attempts to redistribute land and nationalize companies upended long-standing power systems on a national and worldwide level. Because of this, he became a target for strong foreign powers who saw his reforms as a threat to their geopolitical and economic interests in the area. Sankara encountered organized resistance despite his widespread support among Burkinabe people and his recognition on a global scale as a symbol of African liberation. Claims that the West was funding domestic dissidents and conducting clandestine activities to undermine his administration gained traction. Thomas Sankara was terminated in a coup d'état in October 1987, allegedly with the help of outside forces, and carried out by his erstwhile supporter Blaise Compaoré. Similar to this, efforts to assert national sovereignty and resistance of Western influence have characterized Ibrahim Traoré's administration in Burkina Faso. Sankara's efforts in opposing outside intervention and regaining sovereignty over Burkina Faso's resources and governance are mirrored in Traoré's policies, which include his anti-French rhetoric and the expulsion of foreign military forces. Similar to Sankara, Traoré's administration has been beset by ongoing difficulties and purported attempts to topple it with outside assistance. Broader geopolitical conflicts about African sovereignty and Western dominance in the Sahel region are reflected in the continuous coup attempts and internal instability. However, how did Traoré avoid a coup every time? In order to protect his presidency and preserve peace in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré has put strict security measures in place in response to the ongoing threat of coups and outside intervention. Given the seriousness of the threats against him, Traoré has made substantial improvements to his personal security information. When it comes to his official residences and public appearances, he makes sure that he is always accompanied by obedient and well-trained personnel. This proactive strategy seeks to fortify him by reducing any weaknesses that might be used by coup conspirators or other forces looking to topple his government. The deliberate deployment of military and paramilitary groups renowned for their loyalty to Traoré's government is a component of his security plan. Advanced surveillance technologies and communication systems have been provided to specialized forces tasked with protecting the president. These units have been reinforced. These precautions not only strengthen Traoré's physical defenses, but also allow for quick reaction to possible threats, guaranteeing that any attempt to penetrate his security perimeter is quickly neutralized. Traoré has made investments in monitoring and intelligence gathering capabilities in addition to physical security upgrades. This entails keeping an eye on internal communication systems and closely examining actions and movements in the political and military domains. The goal of Traoré's administration is to prevent coup attempts before they have a chance to become real threats by keeping an eye out for indications of internal discord or outside influence. Traoré understands the value of upholding civilian safety and public support above and beyond military and security measures. His administration has put outreach programs and community policing efforts into place with the goal of building mutual respect and cooperation between the local community and the government. In addition to improving public safety, these initiatives act as a deterrent to civil disturbance or protests that coup plotters might use against them. Traoré maintains his diplomatic maneuvers abroad by forming strategic partnerships with nations that uphold Burkina Faso's sovereignty and non-interference doctrines. Traoré reduces the possibility of isolation or diplomatic pressure from Western powers hostile to his leadership by fostering diplomatic ties with countries outside of the conventional Western zones of influence. Are all these coups taking place because he is a good leader? Traoré's policies and conduct make it clear that he puts Burkina Faso's national interests ahead of those of outsiders. Traoré has shown that he is committed to upholding Burkina Faso's sovereignty by separating himself from Western powers and focusing on alliances with countries like China and Russia, and pursuing connections that support national objectives. The frequency of coup attempts may be interpreted as an indicator of Traoré's resistance to outside power and meddling in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. He has taken direct action against established forms of external control and influence, especially those originating from past colonial powers, by refusing to attend summits headed by the West and by expelling foreign armies. Do you think the West will succeed to take out Ibrahim Traoré, as they did with Thomas Sankara? What do you think about every African country having a leader like Ibrahim Traoré? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. And please subscribe and turn on the notifications bell for more informative videos like this one. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.